All right, you're all set.
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Brent Elrod. I'm National Program Leader, have responsibility for the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network. I've also got Acting Division Director responsibilities within the Institute of Youth, Family, and Community at USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And we're gathered today to discuss the funding opportunity that was released last week for fiscal year 20 for the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network. We've got a number of slides to get through, and we have about 3 breaks in there for Q&A. So we're just as a reminder as you come on to make sure your phones are muted, your computer audio is muted as well, so that we don't have any feedback, or at least we can minimize that. Also, as you have questions, you don't have to wait for the Q&A sessions, but you can go ahead and drop those into the chat box. I'm joined today by Sydney Turner, also based with me here in Kansas City, and she's going to monitor the chat for us. And then when it gets to the Q&A session, she'll go back, start at the top, and we'll take those questions one by one during the allotted 5-minute or so segments that we have for Q&A at the 3 different breaks during the presentation today. As we get started, just want to take note and acknowledge those who are participating, like all of us, likely remotely, and the effort that's been made to ensure that you can continue to work while so many others are out of work and facing really difficult times as a result of concerns about coronavirus and COVID-19. We know that the situation is also exacerbating challenging circumstances that our agricultural producers have been facing. And we've all been reading about interruptions in the supply chains, some of the challenges in terms of folks gathering closely together to do some of our ag production work, some of the challenges to ensure that labor is going to be available as we put crops in the ground and as we harvest, depending on where folks are in their particular season. So we just want to acknowledge that, and also the foresight of leaders and Congress in terms of providing the funding to support the development of a Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network, so that we can be present and able to assist producers as they face and encounter difficulty associated with the work that they do and the food that they provide all of us. So as we take stock, just we go through this today, let's think in that context. It's like the target opportunity here is to ensure that services are available when needed if a producer is encountering any kind of stress. So we're starting here with one of the dedicated pages that has a couple links, and these will be to the NIFA funding opportunity page, as well as where the grants.gov page, where you can download the request for application for this particular announcement. I'm going to encapsulate some of the language that's in the RFA, but it doesn't replace your reading those RFAs closely and being able to respond to all of the requests and to be able to meet the evaluation criteria within. But we're going to start with just some of the purpose and some of the basics associated with the program. And you see there, it's to establish a network that connects individuals who are engaged in farming, ranching, and other agricultural related occupations to stress assistance program. And we are using farmer in the broadest sense. And it really is about anyone that's engaged anywhere along the food supply chain, but it also includes private forest owners and managers as well. We want to make sure that if somebody is in need, that they're able to connect with a network that can connect them with the support and services that they may need. Here we have 4 different entities that can serve as lead applicants for the funding for the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network. You see those are Indian tribes, and you see the definition there to link to ensure that you meet that particular qualification, as well as state departments of agriculture, state cooperative extension services, as well as non-governmental organizations. So any collaboration of this group, but at least one of these needs to serve in the lead as a lead applicant to request the funding for the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network. In addition, there's some other eligibility requirements. These include all proposed regional partnerships, or another term we're using interchangeably is networks, must be initially composed of 3 or more member institutions and entities. In addition, the application must include signed commitment letters from these collaborators, as well as any others that are listed in the RFA. Part 3 will provide additional detail about those requirements. In addition, at least 2 network members involved in the proposed project must be currently delivering services in the Economic Research Services designated rural counties or rural census tracts in urban counties. Within the RFA, we direct you to the rural urban continuum codes to make sure that you're meeting this particular qualification. If you fail to do so, the application will be rejected for review. We're also asking that we provide awards for 4 regions. And in this particular RFA, there is no matching requirement for the funding. The amount of funding that we're proposing is for these 4 awards, 1 for each of the regions. For the West, the North Central, the Northeast, and the South are listed here on the slide. Applicants may request up to a total of $7,187,000 for a 36-month project period. That period is September 1 of 20 to August 31 of 2023. What you need to be certain of here is that we are only ensuring that the funding is available in year 1. So as you put proposals together, you see the breakout there for each of the totals. So in fiscal year 20, $2,396,750, and in subsequent years, $2.4 million can be requested. Based upon, we are working with the funding that Congress has appropriated for fiscal year 20. So that results in the numbers there broken out for the 4 regions. And we are anticipating and hopeful that Congress will continue to provide that appropriation in subsequent years, but there's no guarantee of that. So just be certain then that as you put these requests together, you're putting it in for the prospect for 3 years, but there's only one guarantee of 1 year of funding. This is the project type that we're requesting. Applications are going to be accepted for regional networks. You see the long-term goal, it's to establish a nationwide farm and ranch stress assistance network that provides this element, stress assistance programs to individuals who are engaged in farming, ranching, and other agricultural related occupations on a regional basis. This slide lists the category of services that the network should offer on a regional basis. They include farm telephone helplines and websites. It includes trainings. That would encompass training programs and workshops for the following. They can target advocates for individuals who are engaged in farming, ranching, and other occupations, as well as other individuals and entities that may assist individuals who are engaged in farming, ranching, and other occupations, and in addition are in crisis. Third suite of the services include support groups, and the fourth are outreach services and activities, including the dissemination of information and materials. We're only accepting new applications for this round of funding. Folks may be aware that we went out to bid in fiscal year 19 when Congress appropriated $2 million in funding. So those individuals that receive those awards, those entities are eligible to apply, but they must submit as new applicants. In other words, this is an open competition, and so everyone will have a level playing field as they enter into the competition for this funding. As I mentioned previously, we do not require matching for this funding. Grants.gov is the only conduit for applications, and so it's important that you follow all the guidelines in the request for applications, as well as the NIFAGrants.gov application guide. You can see a link for that in the RFA. The proposal deadline is June 23rd, 2020 at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll mention it now, but I'll mention it again. We invariably receive proposals that come in after the submission time. Folks often wait as they are gathering that last letter of support, that last piece of information, and then they encounter some hiccup with the submission at 4:50, and it doesn't come in until a few minutes after 5. Folks are calling, asking if they could have relief. The answer is no in almost every instance. Extenuating circumstances such as floods, emergencies, hurricanes, there might be a contingency in that regard. But if you're not taking the time to get the proposal in by the deadline, then there's the risk that that application will be disqualified from review. So I'll say it and reinforce it: submit early if at all possible. All right, so let's stop here for just a moment and take any questions from the initial information that I provided. So there's a few questions there that you should be asking yourself. Is it what you want to do? Can you do it to the scale that we're asking? Are you eligible, first and foremost? If you're not, then find an eligible entity to consider coming alongside with as a partner, a collaborator, in order to potentially submit. Do you have the partners? We're asking for all states in the region to be included for the suite of services that was previously mentioned. And so if you are looking to target, say, one state, then it's very important that you have other partners that are potentially able to serve all the other states in the region. Can you meet the deadlines? As I just mentioned there, we always have those late applicants, and it's uncomfortable to let them know that they will not get reviewed by being submitted late. So Sydney, why don't you talk through the chat questions with me, and then I'll respond in order.
Oh, certainly. The first question is, the RFA says it wants 2020 grants to build upon funded projects in 2019. Can you explain more completely the relationship between new grants and already existing projects or infrastructure?
Yeah, so what we're asking is for anyone that submits to be alert to any other activities that are providing support in this space, and so that's the key piece, to ensure that you're not duplicating existing efforts, and that if there is infrastructure in place that you potentially can come alongside, tap into, cross-refer to, then that would be a mechanism in order to do so.
Okay. The next question is, the 2020 RFA has roughly the same target outcomes as the 2019 RFA. If an applicant received 2019 funding, and particularly if they also received the 1-year no-cost extension and would like to apply for 2020 funding, how would you recommend that they frame the 2020 to 2022 work when the target outcomes are effectively the same as their existing and overlapping 2019 funding? Any recommendations on how to speak to that in the application so the reviewers are not confused would be much appreciated, and they are happy to unmute if need be to clarify.
No, I think that's a pretty clear question. And so, with the folks that did receive funding in fiscal year 19, NIFA relocated to Kansas City, and it took us a while to do our due diligence on the review to release funds. So some of those projects are just getting underway. So as I mentioned on the first question, in response to the first question, is that we want to make sure that any funding doesn't duplicate what those current efforts have underway. So if it's a particular applicant that's received that funding, what we're conscious of is, in many instances, we were asking for an assessment of, in that first year, based upon the available funds of under 2 million, so less than 500,000 for each of those groups that were awarded, to basically do a SWOT analysis to determine what that suite of services were available within the region, and then to look out beyond that, how that work could be grown to build those collaborations, to build those partnerships, to ensure that the suite of services were available in all 12 or 13 states in a region and or the territories, depending on if you're in the South or the Western regions. So there really shouldn't necessarily be a conflict or an overlap. Folks should be able to clearly identify that previously submitted what their plan of work was, and then subsequent, then if they were to request additional funding through this cycle and beyond, how they would utilize the information from that planned SWAT to be able to build out the services going forward in the subsequent years where the funding is offered for fiscal year 20 and following years. Next question.
Next question. As part of the scope of work, would it be permissible to include gathering data via survey or other method from farmers in the region on stressors to better understand them so we can address them?
It would. It's certainly important here as we start to understand the challenges and the issues. They're not necessarily going to be the same in every state or every locale or every region. You know, potentially you look at the North Central region with, you know, big ag, and then you look at the Northeast with more local and regionalized food systems. It's not going to be a one size fits all approach. So it's certainly appropriate to identify the need and be able to address it accordingly. And that certainly, as the collaborators come together and look at the states within their region, then how might that information be shared? It's also important here, and one of the reasons that stakeholder input led us to approach this with these regional efforts as opposed to potentially state by state efforts, is that we could ensure then that we're going to share best practices within the region and across regions going forward. We don't want to have a lot of multiple projects then where it's not entirely clear that we're using the most proven practice. We're ultimately talking about ensuring that producers and their family members stay healthy and wealthy and not have issues that would potentially lead to self-harm or harm to others. And it's very, very critical then that we have promising and evidence-based practices that ensure, first off, that we do no harm, and second of all, that we get folks connected to the suite of services that potentially can support them in moving forward for another day. Next question.
Next question is, how can we find out who the potential partners or 2019 recipients in a region are so that we can avoid duplication and increase opportunities for collaboration?
The RFA includes the link within it to the fiscal year 19 awardees. In addition, you can get that information directly from the NIFA website. You can also reach out to me independently. Sydney, if time permits, before we wrap, if you can potentially find that link and drop it in the chat, then that would be helpful so folks have it directly if they've not looked closely at the RFA to find it. Those will, within that page, then it'll link to abstracts, which include the information for the project directors. And so folks are certainly comfortable to reach out directly to those individuals. The abstracts will also provide the overview of their scope of work for the respective projects. So folks can have that. And just, you know, one further note, and it ties back to the first question and also my response to that second, is that because of the delay in funding, there are not progress reports or annual reports for the four entities that received awards in fiscal year 19. Their work is just getting underway. So the abstracts to the work, which is available through our report system, is going to be your best source of information other than reaching out directly. The other thing that I can ask is if folks want to drop their name and email address into the chat box as we get prepared to wrap. Don't do it now so that we can make sure we stay on top of the questions. But if you want to do that as we get to that final set, then folks can look and decide if they want to reach out to somebody else that's also on this applicant webinar. Next.
Next question is it reasonable to assume this grant is to fund behavioral health counseling as opposed to improving business performance as a primary de-stressor?
So first off, we're not asking, and this funding doesn't support direct behavioral health counseling. It will provide access to clinical support for folks that potentially need it. So this is less about direct behavioral health care than it is access to the support, the education, the training that hopefully would obviate the need for behavioral health. But we want to make sure if there is a crisis situation that's presenting, that the network can connect that individual as quickly as possible to crisis support. And so each region then, and the states and the partners and collaborators within the region might have different mechanisms to ensure that. But that's also one of the reasons we want these awardees going forward to talk with one another, so that, again, as I mentioned at the outset, we're sharing promising practices that can be adopted across state lines. Next.
Next question is stress is referred to in a very broad way, referring to the CDC. Can you talk about stress a little bit more?
It's purposely left broad. When Congress and industry partners came to the agreement to support this funding in the Farm Bill, it was first off that we don't want producers to die at their own hand, and we certainly don't want family members to experience that. So the stress that leads up to potentially that kind of choice is multiple, it's varied, it can be incremental, it can also be over time. So the regions, as they come together, they should be thinking about, again, what is that network of services that would help to mitigate all kinds of stress that would potentially lead to a reduction in worst possible outcomes, which would include suicide, harm to others, failure of the family farm. And so the previous question, and I may have not answered that fully, asked about the financial piece. Certainly, as we're looking at some of the challenges associated with income and finances, then we want to be able to link these producers with the best information. There's other programs, there will be other groups that will provide those kinds of services, but it's important for the network to know who they are and how to connect those producers and family members with those kinds of supports. Let's take two more and then we'll move on to the next round of slides.
Well, we only have one more question.
All
It's
right,
more of
good.
a comment, and it speaks to one of the questions regarding the partners or potential partners from the 2019 recipients. I just wanted to let everybody know that I will drop that information into the chat box where you can find that information. And several of those are on the call now and are wanting to reach out and join and collaborate with you guys. So seek them out.
Okay, all right, we'll move forward. All right, so this section, we're going to talk about some of the administrative requirements and the items. Specifically, we're going to discuss unallowable direct costs, indirect fringe costs, organizational management information that's required, your reporting requirements, and then who you should contact for additional administrative questions that I may not be able to answer as a result of my focus on program. All right, some of this will come as no surprise to you that have requested or received federal funds. These are pretty generic in terms of unallowable direct costs. One of the things that we often hear is, can I provide incentives to entice participation? That's typically unallowable, and so steer clear of that. Similarly, we're not going to support your building a a room to host a support group. We'll ask you to potentially lease space or to take advantage of um, uh, in-kind resources that would allow for that particular activity. Meals are also discouraged, so before or dinner after a meeting or a session, that includes for staff as well as for potential program participants. Other direct costs that are unallowable include lunch during a meeting without justification. So there will be instances that you potentially could meet through lunch as a working agenda that would be allowable. We have to state it here, just to repeat it, but alcoholic beverages and or entertainment is also disallowed. And once an award has expired, you may not submit for reimbursement any costs that expended afterwards. This information is listed in more detail on page 22. So indirect costs are limited to 30% of the total federal funds or to the lesser amount based upon your rate or the equivalent of 30% of total federal funds awarded. So I'm going to invite you to look closely at the RFA because it's also going to include a link to more information about indirect costs. And hopefully that'll be able to answer any of your questions. If you have subsequent questions, then we're going to direct you back to our admin office for clarification. So actually, I did include one of the links here on the slide in terms of where you can find more information about indirect costs and how you would potentially negotiate a rate with us if you did not have one. You do have the DeMinimis option, which is 10% of the modified total direct costs. And so you can include that after you have been notified if you are going to be awarded funding. So this should be one that you pay close attention to, but also know that if you don't have this established yet, the rate, then you're going to have the option to submit that if you are recommended for award. All right, because some folks that are going to be submitting to us may be new to our agency and haven't established a grant and a treasury account with us, you may have to submit additional management information related to your institution. This is especially true for non-governmental organizations who would need the related forms that you see there on the screen. And we do that to ensure that you're going to be able to effectively manage the taxpayer funds and also achieve the deliverables that are set out in the RFA. We have a number of reports that, again, all of our federal grants are going to be required to submit, and we do that through a interface called Report. Those that are awarded, the 4 awardees will have to submit a project initiation, and then subsequently these additional reports around finances and technical reports. As I mentioned then, Jeanette Jensen is one of our administrative contacts, and you see her phone number as well as her email address. She may hand you off to others depending on the particular question. So I encourage you to, I'll leave that screen up for just a second longer, take a sip of water so that you can write that information down if it's needed. All right, let's talk about the application process. As I mentioned earlier, folks sometimes submit late, and one of the reasons is because they haven't got their self-established within grants.gov early enough. It can take weeks to get yourself, if you get your organization successfully registered, if you've not done that previously. Or if you have and it's been a while since you submitted a federal application, then I would encourage you to go through to ensure that everything's up to date, there's no missing pieces, because we get those calls leading up to the last couple of days saying, I've stepped through the hoops, but I've still got one hurdle I haven't overcome, and we're typically not able to intervene. So PDFs are the only documentation allowed format that we accept. This also trips folks up over and over again. We'll get Word documents. There will be one document that comes in as either a letter of support or a resume or CV from a collaborator in a Word document that somebody has neglected to convert to PDF. It does not make it into our system and can lead to the rejection of the entire proposal when reviewers see that it's incomplete. Similarly with the budgets and the budget justifications, make sure that the forms are in order and they're in PDF format. All right, so as I mentioned at the outset, those two links that were on that opening slide, I repeat it here and show you what it's going to look like on the NIFA page. So you've got your opportunities to see the eligibility issue, the opportunity to view the RFA, and then the opportunity to connect with grants.gov to apply for the grant. So certainly read the RFA, read it closely. If you have particular questions, put those in writing to me via email after this, and we'll see if we can answer those for you if we don't answer them today. All right, in terms of the application process, we want you completing all the application, all attachments. So you see there, I repeat, some are forms, some also need the PDF attachments. Submit all requested information, read and follow all instructions. The NIFAGrants.gov application guide is equally important to the RFA. And so make sure that you're reviewing both documents as you're putting your proposal together. Do not exceed the page or the font limit. And I've got them listed here for you. There's also a checklist in the RFA so that you don't have this issue. We will disqualify you if you exceed the page limit. Also, if you want to get a single font, 1-point font or smaller, don't do it because we'll disqualify it. I have to do it each year. And the reason we do that is because if you go smaller, you get more room for content, and we want to be fair and equal as we can with all the submissions. The narrative is broken up in 4 different sections. You see there: introduction, approach, project performance, and institutional capacity. We've upped the numbers in terms of the approach, the assessment, and the capacity to allow for the increased funds and likely number of collaborators, and also the period of performance being able to stretch over 3 years. So for those that submitted in fiscal year 19, there were fewer pages. This year, again, for the reasons I just mentioned, we've increased it. We've also increased the number of additional maps, tables, and figures up to an additional 6 pages for a total of 28 pages for the RFA. So you should be able to make a strong case for your network with those allowable numbers. Other pieces that are included, in this case, the bibliography and references. There's no page limit associated with those. Similarly, commitment and pledge letters, depending on how many you have. You only need to submit the fiscal agent letter if you don't have your own 501c3 or related. But we are saying beyond those, no other attachments. Don't include appendices that will lead to declination for review. You may have multiple, we expect you'll have multiple senior key person profiles. And so each of those individuals, you need to have a bio sketch, current and pending support, as well as a conflict of interest form to ensure that when we set up the peer review process, we don't have anyone looking at an application that potentially would have a conflict with the submission. Other forms and attachments that are required are the budget justification, and this includes the subaward budgets, supplemental information form. The FRSAN is the program code. Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network is the program name. We have an error in the RFA where these are listed in reverse on the RFA on page 21. So this is your go-to information here. FRSAN for the program code, Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network for the name. Make sure that conflict of interest is included because, as I mentioned, that helps us set up the peer review process. We've included a checklist on pages 20 and 21. I encourage you to use it. It's not for you to submit with the application, with the proposal, but it does give you a way to ensure that you're including all of the required forms and meeting the expectations. We will have and typically receive incomplete applications that will leave out a key piece of information. It may get moved forward for review by the committee, but it typically will not score well because it's missing that key piece of information. If you have some issues with submission with grants.gov, we encourage you to get the case ID number so that we can track that. That'll be our way also for them to provide us information about what the challenges was, if it was something grants.gov related or not. And then also we encourage you to correct errors, resubmit up until the deadline. So we will accept the latest valid application received before the deadline. That means if organization A has 2 submissions, we will take the one with the 4:59 timestamp as opposed to the one that came in earlier than that, and only look at the latest application. So what we ask is you don't put your drafts in there and make us go through 5 or 6 of them, but we do recognize that sometimes folks will submit, they'll find something or get an additional piece of information and still have time. They are allowed to make that submission. All right, once it's received here, this is the way that you'll be able to track that it in fact has been received as moving forward. The first will confirm receipt from grants.gov. The second will indicate a validation or rejection. Third will indicate that it's been passed on to NIFA. If it's been passed on to NIFA, that does not guarantee its review. We will still do a technical review for some of the issues that I just described. The first will confirm receipt, and the second is the key one, which will tell you if it's been accepted for review or if it's been declined for review. All right, let's stop there. I see that the questions have been piling up. Sydney, you want to take them in order?
Before we get to the question, I just want to clarify, it is not 1.5 font. It is 1.5 spaced pages,
Yeah,
just
thanks.
because we probably will not be able to read that
Yes,
one
thank
and a
you.
half inch font. So for clarity purposes, it
Yeah,
is
thanks.
1.5 spaced pages and a reasonable font, i.e. 12 point.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. All right, so the first question that we have come in is, the RFA says NIFA is seeking regional or sub-regional network of support. Brent referred only to regional. Can you better explain what is intended by the use of sub-regional for the scope of the proposal?
It could mean that we don't receive a submission that necessarily is going to serve an entire region in the first year of the project. So as an example, one of the awardees last time that successfully completed served a sub-region within the larger region. And so that was accepted. So we have to allow some leeway based upon what kind of proposals that we get. The goal, of course, is to ensure that producers in any state and or territory in a respective region over the course of this project that is reaching out can potentially be connected to services. So it may mean that as based upon the collaborative partners, the technical expertise that they bring, the geographic reach that they have to start out within a sub-regional effort, but the intent is to grow it to the entire region over the course of the 3 years of the period of performance.
All right, thank you. Next question. Should commitment letters only include language from the RFA, agreed to their stated rules in the project, and have agreed to abide by the management plan, or can they be more specific and tailored to by the partner?
I think that it's both. We certainly want to understand. Well, first off, reviewers are not just looking for generic letters that yes, they think this is a great idea and you should do it, but it's from somebody who has said this is how they're going to contribute their expertise, talent, time, resource, in kind to support the effort. And so that should link directly to the plan of work that's been proposed. but they can certainly then drill down in that letter about how they're going to perform that particular piece that they have agreed to based upon the pledge.
Right. Next question. We have more than 10 plus partners. With so many partners, is it expected that they are all described within the 22 narrative pages?
Yes.
All right, the next question. We all know farmers are in crisis right now. The RFA executive summary states that the purpose of the grant is to carry out programs to address farmer stress and suicide risk, but the broader purpose statement speaks mostly to setting up the network. Can the grant be used to help the farmers who need it immediately by providing funding for existing programs, or is it really only for network formation?
So the suite of services is what I will refer this person back to. The training, the support groups, the referral to clinical counseling, the access to telephone helplines and websites that would provide information and or connection to service. So those are the required elements based upon the Farm Bill authorizing language. And so that's our expectation, that those services be offered by the members of the network.
All right, there was just a comment regarding the information for the USDA Contact for AMD. Somebody has provided that email address, but I will say that this is recorded and these slides will be up on our website for any information that you might have missed. It will be up on our website hopefully by next week. And as always, you can email myself or Brent if you have any questions.
All right,
All
so
right,
we're good to move on.
we are good.
All right, thank you. All right, so this next section is going to talk about the review process, and then we'll wrap it up with some final Q&A. So be thinking about what other lingering questions that are going to be on your mind. So here's the screening process. This information is also referenced on NIFA's website and throughout our RFAs. Screening for requirements. We look for the program scope, the mandatory components, budget, duration, page limit. There's that font size, or in this case, spacing. And so those are typically listed. They will determine whether or not, if you've met those, that it moves on once it's received by NIFA for peer review. As I mentioned, late submission will be rejected unless an applicant can document extenuating circumstances. In that particular instance, in addition, you should contact me if you run into that issue so that I'm alert sooner rather than later. And also, you should contact me if you don't receive an email from us after 2 weeks of the submission deadline. We'll be moving fairly expeditiously through the review process once we do close the announcement. Keep Sydney and I updated of any change in the lead project director's email address. All right, let's talk about the competitive review process. Those of you who submitted to NIFA in the past are familiar with this. It's designed to be fair and unbiased. We include your peers as reviewers. Obviously, they cannot have any connection to a particular proposal. We're looking for folks from other federal government agencies, from universities, from farmers and ranchers. And so we ask all of them to look at the evaluation criteria to then score the proposals against those and only use that information in the application. So when I mentioned no appendices, also if you include a hyperlink to additional information, we will direct the reviewers to not click on that link to seek out additional information. We'll also discourage them from Googling your organization or any other way to find anything other than the proposal, the information that you provided to conduct the review. Your understanding of the review process will help you prepare a successful proposal. Here's the panelists' role. We ask them to provide constructive and unbiased evaluation, ensure the confidentiality of the information that you provided and the submitters, avoid any conflicts of interest. Through that confidentiality, we want the proposal content and the identity of the applicant protected. We want the reviewer's identity protected. Your reviews that we receive from the reviewers will be shared with the project director only. It's up to them to disseminate it to any other members within the network. That includes the panel proceedings. So what we'll provide are the individual reviewer reviews that have been assigned, as well as a consensus summary based upon the entire panel's deliberation. These are the elements that we will be using for criteria to evaluate the proposals: the partnerships and collaborations, the relevancy of the approach, technical merit, and you see multiple subparts as we talked about, the achievability of the effort that's been proposed, the expertise and the track record of the applicants, the adequacy of your personnel, facilities, and instrumentation, and the adequacy of your plans for outcome-based reporting and communication. As I mentioned, this is a high-profile program. Congress is asking for updates on our progress. The media is keenly interested. We want to have metrics that can demonstrate that the overarching goals are being achieved. And so really important to spend considerable time there to ensure that you can answer those questions for us. You may, after looking at the proposal or the application and or this webinar, decide that you don't want to submit, but you are interested in helping to identify the best awardees across the 4 regions. If so, then you can submit your information for consideration as a reviewer. You see the request there. We're asking you to include description of your experience and expertise, your contact information, and whether you plan to be included in any role in a proposal this year. That also needs to look forwardly. If there was some potential that you could be identified as a collaborator in future years, we would also ask you not to consider reviewing. All right, so let's talk about if there's questions here about the evaluation process. We've got a number of things that we've talked about. Any questions in the chat box, Sydney?
There are no questions in the chat box at this time.
All right, so we'll move forward and then just ensure that folks, as you've got those questions, to type them in there. Here's a slide that just talks about our history with what helps to identify success with our agency. Proposals that are well written, succinct, and logical. They address an important problem, which is clearly is. They take an innovative approach and don't duplicate what others may have done or will be doing. Have a solid and detailed plan for identifying, recruiting, and delivering a regional network approach, and have a solid and detailed evaluation plan for outcome-based reporting and measuring impact. Provide data on prior experiences and success. Have partners who are clearly involved and included in the budget, and have a strong management plan. I mentioned these earlier, so I won't spend a lot of time, but just to reinforce that these errors can lead to, after you do a lot of work, for some disappointing news. So one of the ways that you can help to mitigate that is find somebody that you trust that can look at your proposal and provide you a nice, honest critique. Here are some of those criticisms that typically come back. If you're unfocused, if it's poorly presented, it's not clear how you're going to reach the audience. You haven't reviewed what other projects have proposed and or are doing. Work plan may not be clear, logical, or detailed. Too ambitious, not achievable. We recognize that this is an ambitious piece to develop a network over the course of a 3-year period for a full region, but we want you to, in this particular instance, to strive and achieve that goal. If the team lacks experience, if there's collaboration, poor management, consultants, partners aren't referenced clearly, and also if it's unclear what difference the funding will make. All right, so we are coming up on 1:51, so that allows us about 9 minutes for any final question and answers if folks have those, so type those in. I ask also that if you've got stakeholder input about the RFA and how you might like to see future cycles unfold, feel free to email those either to me or to our policy shop at usda.gov. Sydney, we can open up if there's questions.
All right, there are no questions in the chat box at this time.
Okay, so you folks feel free if they want to type in questions. Also, at this point, if they would like to receive additional information, if there's any changes to the RFA during the open period, or if they want any announcements that come out respective to this work or other NIFA announcements that may be forthcoming, you can type your name and email address into the chat box. You can also indicate in the chat box if you're looking for partners or potentially interested in collaborating with others. Feel free to put your name and email in the chat box, and we'll leave it open for the next few minutes for that purpose if you're interested and or any questions. Otherwise, you can feel free to make. We know that most of us are spending our lives on Zoom. And as we're wrapping up here, I just want to thank everybody for their interest in the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network. We know this is a critical area for all of us to attend to, do everything we can to support our producers and their families, not just during this time, but ongoing, and ensure that our food and agricultural supply stays safe and secure, that we're able to feed our nation and the world. Best wishes, everyone. We'll leave this open, but if you need to head off to your next meeting, good luck with your proposals. All right, Sydney, it looks like our chat's slowed. I don't see any additional questions. You'll be able to capture and save the chat.
Yes. Will the recording be available to access? We will have some sort of format of the recording to be accessible. Yes. So hopefully
And
that answers your question, Cindy.
it should be, we will be able to post that on our dedicated FRSAN page on the NIFA site. You said in about a week,
Yes.
maybe? Okay,
Yeah. We'll have to clean it up.
right, okay.
Um,